Hello and welcome back. For the past 3 months I've been comparing 45 RPM reissues to my vintage pressings. I've decided to take a break, and these past days I've been listening to some old albums, and I came up with the idea of invite you to join me for a trip down memory lane and remember those albums that were popular in my teenage years in the mid to late 70s. If you're my age, I hope you enjoy the nostalgia, and if you're not, enjoy the ride. Let's get into it. Back in my school days, you moved to grammar school at 14, unlike today, at 11. It was a great step in your personal development. The time when you met your long-standing friends, the time when you opened up the doors to sexual relationships, to politics, and to the most influential teachers. Your teen years also meant generation gap discernments and an approach to essential books, movies, and comedies which shaped your mind. But most of all, it was about music. The albums that were to become your lifelong companions, your shelter for troubled times, the treasure trove you would never part with. Number 27, Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells. By the time we entered school, the rally-born genius had become a sensation with his all-instrumental first album. Tubular Bells and his cover, created by designer Trevor Key, was immensely popular. Also, becoming the opening theme for the film The Exorcist certainly added to it. But we were underage and not allowed in theatres at the time. His following efforts, Haggis Reach and Omadon, were nearly as successful, but the Platinum Tour was one of the first live concerts I ever attended. In following years, Oldfield switched his instrumental B-sides to song-based music, and he lost respect. Number 26, Dire Straits, Communique. Their second album was our first. It reached number 1 on the charts, and Lady Writer became an instant classic. We soon found out there was a previous LP, which happened to be even better. Stardust with Swing became a fan favourite in no time. When David Knopfler left the band, the sound turned more commercial, and the birth of MTV music videos contributed to worldwide acclaim. Not for us. We miss the early days. Number 25, Genesis, Trespass. Genesis was the band nobody knew, but everyone raved about. Trespass was my first contact with the lads from Charterhouse School. Unfortunately, lyrics were not to be found in my first copy of the album, but my friends, always thoughtful and supportive, provided me with a photocopy to get going. When Hackett left and the band switched to a more pop and commercial-oriented music, we left Collins and joined Gabriel, who'd gone solo. Number 24, Supertramp, Crime of the Century. After 2 irrelevant albums, whose only highlight was Rosie Had Everything Planned, the band was bound to never make it. However, a TV documentary program at the time used a fragment of Another Man's Woman from Crisis What Crisis as opening intro. We then learned that their previous album had become a huge hit everywhere else, so we immediately grabbed a copy. Though no strictly prog rock by the era standards, Crime of the Century was a huge success, only to be surpassed by their following albums. School, Dreamer, Give a Little Bit, Breakfast in America, and other instant classics turned them into superstars, only to fall from grace when Hodgson went his way. Number 23, A Night at the Opera. Somewhere between glam and heavy incarnations, we became acquainted with the band when Bohemian Rhapsody was released. Our infatuation was short-lasting, as 2 tracks from their News of the World album soon became regulars in any sport event. MTV turned them into superstars, and Mercury's premature death and the '92 Olympic songs added to their legendary status. However, by that time, we had been queened out for the rest of our lives. Number 22. Cat Stevens, Tea for the Tillerman. Stephen Georgiou, British singer and songwriter with Greek and Swedish ancestors, had penned some of the most well-known and acoustic songs of the early 70s. He wasn't part of our generation, but our musical knowledge would have gone out on a limb hadn't we learnt some of his most famous anthems. Tea for the Tillerman, together with Tisse and the Firecat, were absolute musts. Many wannabe acoustic guitar players in my days cut their teeth with Morning Has Broken, Moonshadow, Father and Son, or Wild World. Our interest diminished when he embraced the Muslim faith, but his songs remained for the ages. Number 21. Bob Dylan, Street Legal. No one at our school was worth any regard unless you were familiar with the Minnesota Genius, so we flooded the local record shops to grab a copy of his latest album. That was only starting, since his best output belonged to the 60s. Time to turn back time and learn all the classics. The trouble was that our English was not good enough to understand even half of the lyrics. Number 20. Lynyrd Skynyrd. They never gathered a huge fan base around here, but the followers were die-hard fanatics. It was them and no one else, which, if you allow me, is a stretch in devotion quite far out. The Allman Brothers suited me to a higher degree. Made famous by the ubiquitous Sweet Home Alabama, the Florida band had a cult following. His fans were adamant nonconformists who could never see past this band. Never my cup of tea, but the double album One More From the Road is one of a kind. Number 19. The Allman Brothers Band, Brothers and Sisters. For some reason that absolutely escapes me, this was the only album you could borrow from friends, a big deal at the time. Held in a high esteem that Lynyrd Skynyrd, during Allman's tragic death, increased their cult following and turned us to their early albums, the likes of Live at Fillmore East and Eat a Peach. Their late 70s output is not distinctly regarded, but quite well liked over here all the same. Number 18. Fleetwood Mac, Rumours. Hot on the heels of their self-titled album, and only a couple of years after Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham had joined the band, Rumours turned into a worldwide phenomenon. Songs like Don't Stop became an instant classic in our days. However, we had to be lectured by the senior guys at our school on their blues-based origin with Peter Green back in the late 60s. We got familiar with their first earliest output work, and with Them Play On, which included Oh Well. Number 17. Yes, Close to the Edge. Both this album and Fragile were regulars on prog rock radio stations. Roger Dean's captivating and exotic fantasy landscape caught everyone's attention. Together with the Yes album, we had the perfect trilogy in our hands. Notwithstanding, the ensuing double album, Tales from Topographic Oceans, was a hard nut to crack and induced boredom in spades. Part of their fan base had already departed by the time Relayer got them back in shape. Number 16. The Clash, London Calling. The band, formed in London in 1976, were key players in the original wave of punk rock. This double album, released in 1979, earned them popularity and commercial success in the States, soon after their launching in the UK a month before. To us then, it was the band that had opened for The Who in 1982, and the album cover, a tribute to Elvis's first LP. Number 15. The Cars. Coming from Boston and led by Rick Ocasek, they were at the forefront of the new synthesizer-oriented pop. Their debut album appeared on the Billboard 200 chart for 139 weeks. Popular on both sides of the pond, they first disbanded in 1988 after the Door-to-Door album, which failed to be as successful as their previous efforts. Number 14. Bob Marley and the Wailers, Burning. The groundbreaking ska and reggae music formed by Pete Tosh, Bunny Wailer and Bob Marley in the 60s was noted for songs like Get Up, Stand Up and I Shot the Sheriff in our teen years. The latter had already become popular as an Eric Clapton's regular. After topping Jamaican charts, Marley's death in 1981 and his political views made listeners conscious of the dramatic upheavals in the Caribbean, and the Rastafarian hairdo became commonplace in many parts of the world. Number 13. Police, Outlanders d'Amour. Roxanne owned radio stations, music pubs and record shops. The band's popularity skyrocketed following the trio formula based on bass, guitar and drums. Message in a Bottle, I Can't Stand Losing You and many others. Today, they have a legendary status. Sting went solo to a successful career, to be also widely notorious for his activism and involvement in human rights. Number 12. Lou Reed, Rock and Roll Animal. Sweet Jane and Heroin were the real highlights of the live album. The New Yorker had become famous only a year before with his second solo album, Transformer, which included Walk on the Wild Side as a major hit. Consequently, we did our homework and started researching through his long career with the Velvet Underground. The Banana Peel cover was a coveted treasure for vinyl fans, who consider the Warhol-produced album with Nico, featuring experimental performance sensibilities and controversial lyrical topics, as one of the greatest art rock achievements. Number 11. The Doors. Not a 70s band, but the aftermath of their output, together with Jim Morrison's tragic death, carried them through into our teenage years. Their albums remain well sought after into later times, when the double-disc CD compilation became a huge seller. Break On Through and People Are Strange were regulars at FM stations, pubs and record shops. Number 10. Jethro Tull, Stand Up. To prove us newbies, senior guys at school kept telling us this was their masterpiece, pop-up gimmick included. However, we knew for certain that Aqualung and Thick as a Brick, with his newspaper cover, held that spot by far and large. Bach's Blu-ray in E minor, played on flute by every music student at the time, had become irritating, to say the least. So we didn't buy their opinions. Many followers called it a day after a passion play, but Jethro Tull's live performances were always good fun, even though most people seemingly struggled with the first hour of their set list, only to become ecstatic by the end of the show when Aqualung and Locomotive Breath acted as a stellar closing tracks. Number 9. Steely Dan, Asia. This was the album of the highbrow, intellectual and wealthy guys at school with tipsy-topsy equipment, and quite frankly, some things never change. We weren't even granted an opinion about the band or their output, since our gear was not up to the standard. I warmed up to this album and the rest of the 7-core LPs at a later stage in my life, becoming one of my most admired and respected band ever since. Number 8. Deep Purple, Made in Japan. This double live album became a commercial and critical success and was to be found in every record collection at the time. Mine for one. Smoke on the Water or Highway Star were enthusiastically played by FM rock stations, and their live act was held in a higher regard than their studio albums. Every wannabe electric guitar player could deliver the chords for Smoke on the Water in a blink. Their popularity diminished in the 80s, but they never lost their legendary status. Number 7. King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King. Barry Gottlieb's iconic and captivating artwork set the mood to an album which most experts agree to be the foundation of progressive rock, Released in 1969, it was immensely popular at school during the 70s, together with Red or Last Dance in Aspic. Ireland's was my favourite, but that's a different story. Their music was a hard nut to crack, as beautiful melodic passages gave way to intricate and complicated avant-garde music that was not to everyone's liking. By the end of the 70s, only true die-hard fans bought their ensuing albums. They had opened for the Stones in '69 to a massive Hyde Park audience. Number 6. David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Bowie was acclaimed by critics and musicians. Students took sides with regard to his output. To some, he was a genius. To others, overrated. But we all agreed on Ziggy Stardust. The title track and Starman got regular radio play. In 1982, with Let's Dance, he became a household name to an even greater audience. Purists would never forgive him. Number 5. The Kings, Misfits. The tracks Misfits or rock and roll fantasy soon related to our teenage spirit. The Kings had signed with Arista, stripped down to a 5-man core group and reborn as an arena rock band. Their RCA years didn't mean much to us, and only Muswell Hillbillies and Everybody's in Showbiz had made it to our bedroom shelves. When we discovered their 60s period, Ray Davies appealed to us as a true genius. Something Else, Village Green, or Arthur immediately turned them into a cult status band. Number 4. The Who, Quadrophenia. To many, a quartet of hooligans whose leader smashed up his guitar at the end of their performances, and who had written Pinball Wizard, made popular by Elton John. To their followers, including me, one of the greatest bands of the 60s and 70s, unrivaled on stage, with the best rhythmic section rock has ever seen. John Entwistle on bass and Keith Moon on drums were second to none. The movie had had a cult following, but its soundtrack was nowhere as good as the studio album. The senior guys at school preferred Tommy, but we had learnt this one at the wrong time. Number 3. The Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers. The band needs no introduction. One of the seminal groups to several generations. Brown Sugar and Wild Horses were the smash hits from the album, but we preferred Can't You Hear Me Knocking. The red tongue on yellow background is rock's most iconic logo. If you hadn't done it before, it was time to turn back time and learn their 60s smash hits. I Can't Get No, Honky Tonk Women, or Jumpin' Jack Flash. The upside about the Stones is that they have performed longer than the Beatles, and the downside too. Number 2. Led Zeppelin 4. In 1975, the Rolling Stone magazine said that the only bands Led Zeppelin had to compete with for the title of world's best rock band were the Rolling Stones and the Who. Whether we agree or not, their legendary and cult status, their influence on future bands, and their massive live acts are unquestionable. Their fourth album, Untitled, was simply known as 4 or Runes. What escapes me is why they had to use Roman numbers. The track list included Stairway to Heaven, which, legal lawsuits for plagiarism aside, is a 20th century classic. I prefer When the Levee Breaks, but that's me. Bonham's death was a massive blow to the band, which led to their dissolution. Number 1. Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here. Or Dark Side of the Moon. Or Metal. Or Animals. Or The Wall. Pick your favourite. Differences aside, in the 70s, Floyd meant to my peers what the Beatles to my elders. True Floydians prefer their early stage, from Pipers at the Gate of Dawn with Syd Barrett to Obscured by Clouds. This was a dark period, frowned upon by our parents, since fans felt induced to drug consuming by their music. When they hit it out of the park with Dark Side, things gradually changed. Floyd appealed to a greater audience that filled rock arenas, and their ensuing albums, though more commercial, were much more successful. The film The Wall packed cinemas at the time, and their last album, The Final Cut, put an end to the Gilmour Waters collaboration. They reunited in '85 for the Live Aid benefit concert, and in 2005. but the feud lasts to this very day. As a side note, they're not my favorite band. Right, and that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed it. Give us a thumb up or consider subscribing if you like the video. And I'll be back with more vinyl related stuff in the near future. Bye for now and take care.